Okay, so I think we can get started with our next presenter, Lenny Fenster from Microsoft Services. Just a quick recap, in case you'd like to ask any questions and you're just joining us, just use the Q&A dialog box. And I believe Lenny said that he's happy to take questions throughout his presentation, so I will do my best to direct those to him in a timely manner. But if we don't get to them, we'll get to them at the end of the Q&A session. So Lenny Fenster is the Global CTO for the Apps domain within Microsoft Services, where he has been a Slim user for 5 years. The Apps business covers the application development space and includes technology like Azure, mobility, and DevOps. In his role as CTO, Lenny is responsible for worldwide tech strategy for apps and focuses on the key areas of delivery quality, solutions, liaison with the product team and R&D, managing the global community of architects and consultants, and planning, leveraging, and harvesting IP to drive efficiency and productivity. Lenny and his team work directly with Microsoft's customers to help them succeed by embracing the changing and disruptive technology landscape through technologies like blockchain, IoT, intelligent agents, mixed reality, open source, and more. Lenny joined Microsoft in 1998 and has over 25 years of experience in the IT industry, all of it related to designing, developing, and deploying enterprise solutions. Prior to coming to Microsoft, Lenny was Global Director of Systems Integration for SunGard Capital Markets. Lenny has authored several articles in various technology journals, as well as the book, The Effective Use of Microsoft Enterprise Library. And with that, I will let Lenny get started.
Thanks, Elizabeth. That's the first time I think I've heard my whole bio repeated back to me. It makes me feel a little old. So, but thank you for that. Again, just to kind of reiterate a little bit on what Elizabeth said. My name is Lenny Fenster. As she described, I've been in services the whole time I've been at Microsoft. And a couple comments. I had the opportunity to listen to the last half of the last presentation, and it was intriguing to me that there's a lot of similarities there. I think the last presentation was also one. Angelo and Christoph were talking about services from IBM, and I thought it was extremely interesting, the challenges that they faced, how some of the solutions were the same, how they talked about the iterative nature that's necessary, really addressing the cone of uncertainty that they showed, the challenges of mapping actuals back to estimates. We encountered that as well, and so it was intriguing to me to see, how different organizations, both, with the same problems kind of coming at it in different ways, and finding some similar solutions and facing the same challenges. So I thought that was pretty neat. Really interesting, really eye-opening for me, at least. So, and as Elizabeth said, I prefer a dialogue for sure. So I'm happy. My goal here is to help folks understand the journey that we're going through as we've kind of, focusing on mitigating some of the risks that we see and addressing some of the challenges that we face from a services organization, specifically around the app space within Microsoft. So feel free to ask questions as we go along. If there's something that I'm going to cover in a slide, I'll answer that way, and I'll say, yeah, we're going to get to that. But if there's a certain point where you want me to elaborate deeper on that, I'm happy to do that at that time as well. So probably no questions with that yet, though, Elizabeth. So what I plan to talk about today, and again, I apologize a little bit. I have a little bit of a cold that I'm trying to get through, so you might hear me sniffle. If I feel like I'm going to cough, I'll mute real quick so I don't cough into the microphone for everyone. But I'll do my best to spare you all from that. So what I wanted to cover today, what I thought would be valuable for the audience, is to just give you a little background on who we are. Elizabeth talked a little bit about what we do, so just to dive a little bit deeper into that, and then specifically, who are the folks what are the roles that are really involved in this whole estimation experience that we go through? Why did we even do anything? So what was the pain that we were experiencing that caused us to need to do something different than what we've been doing for so long? What have we done to solve the pain, and what are the impacts, and what are we seeing as a benefit from all of that? So again, if there's anything other folks are looking to get from that, please just feel free to shout out. So what we do, in the bio it described a little bit. In the app space, we're focused on solution development and really focus, when I talk about what we do in apps, it's really development, right? So, and we've gone, I've been at Microsoft for 20 years. It's gone through a huge journey. And really our group does development where we focus primarily, but not exclusively, today is really on the cloud, on mobility, on DevOps, but that means a lot of different things. There's some shapes and logos and figures that you see on the slide that might surprise you for Microsoft. So for example, if I'm moving from right to left, one thing that folks probably don't think we do, but we do, is really develop applications from a mobile perspective that support iOS, that support Android, right? On the left side, one of the things that is especially important in gaining importance more and more these days is our ability to support the open source space. And obviously that's important because as we're looking at cloud workloads and trying to drive more and more of the solutions to take advantage of the benefits of the cloud, open source is playing a huge role. So it is Azure, but it's not just Azure. It's really looking at all the different technologies. The DevOps space, which is the shape in the middle, is one that's evolving a lot from, kind of the things that we used to think of. So DevOps has been, we've been doing that for a long time, but it's also changing a lot, not only from a tools perspective, where you see things like CI/CD playing a larger role, but more so from a people perspective. Some of the things that we're seeing really are really having a more significant impact than any real tool or specific tool are the changes that we're seeing from a teaming perspective, where it's not separate devs and separate ops and separate program management kind of working in silos, but really creating teams of folks that are working together, that are driving success at a feature level, and that are wholly responsible for that. So that's kind of the 10,000-foot view of what we do within the app space and where we focus. And again, it's not exclusive to this, but this is really the primary areas where we focus. And I'll pause a little bit, Elizabeth, at each slide just in case there are any questions with any of those. So can you just kind of let me know if we're good? Is that okay?
Yes, that sounds good.
Okay, so I'm assuming no questions so far. So who are we? So from a services organization, there's a lot of different roles, but in the field, the folks that are working with our customers, there's really three primary roles that are with our customers that are focused on helping them create the technical solutions or working with solutions that they already have and trying to figure out if there are challenges or problems and things like that. So we have the bulk of the technical field are the consultants. So folks that are out there working on projects with our customers to help develop a solution aligned with primarily those three areas that I discussed before. And again, those aren't mutually exclusive. Most of the times there's a combination of those three involved there. We also have premier field engineers. So premier field engineers are the folks that, where they do guidance. They're helping teach our folks on constructs like Agile and other areas as well. And they're also, they get very heavily involved when they're, at the support and operate kind of phases. If there are issues, they see performance things, or even just helping our customers learn how that they can do performance, issue identification and deal with, performance tune and debug and troubleshoot their solutions as well. Very, very heavily involved, more so in the operate solutions, but also upfront on the guidance and the teaching aspects. The role I'm going to talk about really for the rest of this, though, because it's the role that really plays the biggest part for us and has historically when it comes to estimation, which is why we're all here, are the architects. So the architects, for as long as we've had services, have had the role of working with our customers to elicit the requirements, to decompose the requirements into, the separate, whatever the unit of measure of was at that time, and also to create the estimates for, to match that, those requirements that they were gathering. And that really, that worked for a while, but it works okay when you're a small organization, but when you start to go global and you're trying to drive more consistency and you need defensibility for that, it quickly breaks down. And that's really where we started to see the pain. So forever, really, or at least for as long as I've been with Microsoft, which has been 20 years, our architects have really kind of had the onus of estimation thrust upon them because they were in the front lines and they were working with our customers, like I said, doing the requirement elicitation and then decomposing them, and then also doing the estimation. And the way that and it's natural, right, for when people are out there doing estimation, is to do it in a similar way that Angelo and Christoph talked, is that they would quickly move from whatever they thought the scope was to what they thought the time and the effort and the duration was, right? Now, when we looked at this, we faced a lot of challenges. One, that's a lot to put onto one person to do and it's a lot when you need to turn these things around quickly. So they were constantly under a lot of pressure, not just to do the architecture, if you will, right? Not just to do the solutioning with, of the technical solution that was required, but also the requirement elicitation, the decomposition, and then adding on the estimation in front, and to turn all of that around very quickly. So velocity was a challenge. Another challenge was that not all of them, their responsibilities were very fragmented, right? So instead of just kind of doing architecture, which is what they felt their primary role to be, they also had to learn a lot of other things in order to do kind of all of the surrounding things, estimation being one of them, right? And so the more time that they had to spend kind of learning those tools and relearning whatever tools we might have had at the time, the less time they were able to focus on doing the stuff that we really wanted them to do, which was the architecture and the requirement elicitation. And then it came to the tooling. So we've been, in this journey that we've been on, we've had various different efforts around how we do estimation. A lot that I heard mentioned in the other one, a lot of Excel-based kinds of things and other kinds of build your own estimation models, very, very varied. And as we tried to drive this globally, that build model required a lot of learning for the architects, so they had to spend time kind of getting certified, if you will, on these internal estimation tools that we had. And then those were constantly in a flux of change. So they not only had to get certified, they'd have to get recertified, they'd have to learn it, and they're spending more and more of their time learning these other ways, that other tools that they needed to do that were apart from where we really wanted them to focus. There wasn't consistency from the estimations. It varied greatly depending upon who was doing it. And again, as you heard in some of the previous presentations, there were just a lot of different tools that were being used. So a lot in Excel, a lot of different methods too, as well. Some were using, WBS models and other kinds of models, and there was definitely a lack of consistency. So when it came, that presented us with a lot of challenges, especially as we tried to address this globally. And so some of the words that I'll use to talk about what we're doing now were very intentional. And so what our goals, when we looked at the problems that we were having, and really the goals that we had in mind, we had our two primary immediate goals were to drive consistency and to drive defensibility, right? And because those were the big pain points that we had, our estimates were inconsistent depending upon which architect was doing the estimate, depending upon where, which geography that architect was working in. Sometimes we even had estimates that would be inconsistent with the same architect involved. So a lot of variability, too much variability from a consistency perspective. And they were not defensible. So as a services organization, we didn't ask the question to Angela and Christoph, I'm kind of interested, but oftentimes when we provide our estimate or how we arrived at our estimates to our customers, they're mostly challenged, right? How did you get to this? Why did you get to this? Why is that 12 hours instead of 8 hours? You know, explain to me. I think it should be less. They never say they think it should be more. It's always, we think it should be less time. We think it should be less effort, right? And so we didn't really have, without a really a solid scientific data-driven approach, our ability to defend the estimates varied greatly depending upon who did the estimate and when they did it and what they were doing with it. And so, and it didn't really speak to the best practices, right? And it didn't really leverage our history that we had. It leveraged a person's history. It leveraged an architect's history of what they thought because they've been doing such and such for so long. But it didn't really leverage our combined history as a global organization. We knew we could do better, right? And so one of the main areas that we strove to really drive is this idea of defensible estimates, right? Make sure that they are based on a scientific approach that results in the time and effort. It comes directly from the requirements as they're created. It's leveraged based upon the size. You'll hear me use size and scope kind of synonymously. So based upon the size that we get back to, and really all of the stuff that the architect is doing during the solutioning and the requirement elicitation phase, really being the data that helps drive the time and effort that comes out at the other end. No longer, though, it being just that architect's idea of the time and effort, but really being a scientific, data-driven approach, leveraging the size to determine the time and effort, which is exactly where SLIM comes in, right?
This is actually in regards, I had a quick question here, and you kind of covered it a bit, but did you experience any resistance among the architects in changing the way they did estimation to a new approach?
We did, right? In fact, I would say that is a great question. It's the question I anticipated because it actually was the biggest challenge, right? What we did here, and I describe it in this slide and the next slide as well, we took control away from the architects, a little bit of the control. And there's the biggest challenge I think we faced. And I see this with our customers because we go out to customers and we talk about this and promote to them this way that, you know, that they could do this as well, is what I'd say is an adoption and change management, right? Initially, although architects didn't want to do the estimate, they also had control over what they said the time and effort was. And what we said is we want you to focus. And so you no longer are you going to need to figure out what the time and effort are. That's the math, right? So we looked at, you know, we read the book, right, Larry Senior's book, and really digested the algorithm of for a given quantity, scope, or size over productivity equals, you know, you get your time and effort on the other end, and we use that to intentionally separate the roles and responsibilities. So quality and productivity we want to get from our actuals. And that's, you know, we're going through the same challenge that Angela said of, you know, talked about with mapping that back, but that's the idea, is to get our productivity, get our quality from the actuals given different kinds of pivot points. Scope is where we wanted our architects to focus. We want you to be architects. We want you to focus on the architecture. We want you to focus on, it is important for you to do the requirement analysis. It is important for you to decompose those down. It is important for you to size them, but, you know, from a complexity perspective. But what we don't want you to do anymore is tell us what you think the time and effort should be. We're going to have other people that do that, right? Because that's the math at the end of the day, or the statistics. It's complex math, but that's the math, and that's what SLIM helps us do at the end of the day, is to tell us what the time and effort is based upon all that. So, yeah, the biggest challenge for some architects was, although they didn't love doing the estimation. They also had control over it, and starting to see that this was something else that was, doing that part of it for them, and adopting that and kind of changing that. That was probably the biggest challenge we had. It didn't last long. It would usually only take one or two instances for them to see the benefits and how they could actually focus on why they got into the job in the first place. They didn't become architects so they could, do estimates. They became architects, really, most of them, I think, to be able to work with customers, to be able to focus on technology, to do the solutioning, the requirement is to decompose the solution down, but they didn't become architects to do the estimation part of it. That was thrust upon them because they were the closest to it. And so what I'm showing here in this slide, and really gets at the heart of really where we change things, is that's where we had the architects focus. And so no longer did they need to get certified and recertified. We had a separate team of folks, the COE, if you will. We call it the Centralized Estimation Team. And these are people, if the architects are doing the art, these are the people that are doing the math or the science. And these are people that all day, every day, all they're doing is getting the scope as determined by the architects, and they're doing the math on that. And so now there's a team here of architects and centralized estimation experts that are working together to create this. And I'll get into it. You see the little circle there. It's very iterative, the architects working together. One of the other things that we did as part of this was to create a standard way of defining what scope is. So scope for us is defined as epics, features, and user stories. You'll hear me call them EFUs, right? It's what our product group uses as well. The good thing about that, there's been a lot of nice benefits that weren't originally planned for this that have kind of come out of this as well. One of the challenges that we actually had in the old way that we did it is there wasn't a single taxonomy for determining what the scope was, right? We now have a single taxonomy for representing scope, all the way from working with our customers during requirement elicitation and what we call the pre-sales phase, through delivery, through support. So what used to happen was, we'd get in there and we'd be working with the customer, and scope changes. Anybody that does Agile, everybody knows that the scope is going to change at some point during the project, many times during the project. Being able to speak to the change in scope is difficult if you don't have the same taxonomy throughout the entire life cycle. So by moving to a single taxonomy to represent scope, which is what the templates within SLIM use to incorporate, to do the sizing for time and effort, allowed us to solve a lot of those problems. And as scope will still change. As we move down that cone of uncertainty, we'll learn more, it'll grow, it will change. But we could talk specifically about what changed. We can say what we thought was easier is now complex. What we thought was 3 user stories is now 5 user stories, and we can have a conversation about it that was really, really difficult, if not impossible, to have before. And so there's been a lot of, we've gotten a lot of this. Again, at the result that we've gotten, which has provided us enormous value from a quality perspective, right? We have the consistent estimates now. We have defensible estimates now. And we've also seen a lot of business benefits as well. So we measure velocity. So one of the challenges that I talked about before was our architects they still are constantly under pressure to turn these things around very quickly during the pursuit. By actually having intentional expertise on what each of these roles do, and our architects are doing what they do each and every day. They wake up every morning and that's what they do. Centralized estimates, they wake up every day. They know how to use SLIM. This is what their expertise is, so they're able to do it much quicker. So our velocity, and one of the things we were concerned about is we're introducing a hop here. Our theory was that we'd be able to turn it around quicker, and we have. We've actually gone from, we measured it last year, and we went from days for architects to do this. Our average turnaround time for an estimate was just under 4.5 hours last year. So a huge turnaround from a velocity perspective. We also reduce costs. So architects are some of our most expensive people, and we don't need the same expensive resources doing the estimates. So just from a cost of sale perspective, we've also been able to decrease our overall cost of sale. We're still in the process of really measuring that, but we know it to be true. We just have to add some reporting around it. Anyway, so I'll pause there before I move on.
Yes, we actually have a couple more questions
Great.
for you.
Good.
Are you no longer using a bottom-up estimating approach in combination with the top-down / parametric slim estimate?
Right. We have standardized on a top-down approach. We used to do a bottoms-up approach. It used to take a long time. We actually, in our conversations with QSM, with you guys, we tested out our theory of where we would spend a lot of time doing a bottoms-up approach. It's a very costly, much more costly to do a bottoms-up approach. And we tested that against someone coming in sight unseen and doing the same thing from a top-down approach, and got within 2%, I think, of what the result was. So after doing that a couple times, we were pretty convinced that the top-down approach came close enough for us to be able to take that. And again, it's a lot quicker and a lot less costly to do it that way. So yeah.
Got two more.
Yeah.
How do you do change management?
The clarifying question, how do we do change management with Microsoft, or how do we do change? I don't know if we can be more specific. Are they asking about the change management challenge that we had specific to this? I'll assume that unless they come back and clarify. And so as Global CTO, I can help influence that a little bit. Really, what I didn't want to do was a mandate. What I really wanted to do was get buy-in, because this was a good thing for our architects to be able to do why they became architects in the first place. And so it was really a lot of conversation, a lot of presentations, a lot of trying to help them understand why I and my team thought that this was actually a good thing for them. Because, by the way, I mean, they weren't happy. There was a lot of dissatisfaction with the old way too, right? So architects didn't love having to get certified and recertified in order for this stuff. It was really taking them away from that. So but like I said, I mean, it took a little bit of control away. It often took just a couple times of them doing it. Sometimes oftentimes we still do put mentors in place. So if an architect is just coming into this and they're new, we'll hold their hands a little bit to get through this. And I haven't really seen, an architect after doing it one or two times that isn't happy. I mean, we have much more positive feedback about how this has improved their life, their work life, better than what it was before. So but it does take a little bit of time for those who are a little bit uncertain about it.
What is OSE certification?
Oh, geez. Okay. So I forgot I had that acronym in there. So we have that was one of the challenges. So OSE stands for One Services Estimator. It was the tool that all of our architects had to get certified and recertified to do as that changed. We still have One Services Estimator. So you actually see a little picture of it there with Slim over to the right. It really now, for the apps domain, for the apps business, it really acts more as a data repository, or at least one of the data repositories for our estimates. It still holds some of the tools. So we're on a journey here. What we've been able to get into our Slim templates right now are really most of the templates for doing custom application development, IoT, bots, blockchain, those kinds of things that we have, and we have different templates for each of those. Right now, focused primarily on the functional requirements. We don't have the NFRs, the non-functional requirements in Slim yet, and we don't have, and someone had asked about on a previous presentation, kind of the costing and some of those things that happen outside of what we currently have within our SLIM templates, like how do you adjust for risk reserve and things like that. And so that stuff happens within OSE and some of our other tools right now. So we're kind of on a journey. We use SLIM for primarily right now getting back to dev and test effort. Then there's some other leveling and things that still go on behind the scenes. The architects, though, the beauty is the architects don't get involved in that stuff. They're involved in the conversations, but they don't have to know the different tools or anything now. Now they focus on where we want them to focus, which is requirements, the complexity, and the size. I forgot I even had that in there.
Now I'm getting quite a few questions, so let me know if you want to proceed.
I want to answer the questions people have. So
good.
Yeah.
How big is your central estimation team?
Yep. So we sized it. Right now, it is 10 people in India that are primarily doing that, with a couple extra people. Like we have some people in the U.S. for public sector cleared deals that, because it's necessary. We need someone with clearance that has to look at that. So the folks that are offshore can't really, they're not allowed to look at those things. So there's some of those things. We have some subject matter experts that are really driving this, that are in different time zones as well. But the core team that sits in India for this is about 10 people. Now that's just for the apps domain. We have other business, so the way that I didn't get into kind of how we're organizing services. My business is the dev one. There's another one that really focuses on infrastructure. There's another one that focuses on data AI. All the other businesses are looking at the progress that we've made here and looking to take that on as well. And so if we think that will happen, there's a big push for that, and if that does, we'll grow out the team. So we started with 10, and we're sizing it as we go. Honestly, actually, I should say, we've gone through a journey here. So we started actually with architects in India as well. And then we've gone to a different role that's more project management focused, because the architects wanted to do architecture. And even though they were in India, they still didn't, they still wanted to do what the architects were doing. Through our experience with this, we found that the activities that the folks in the CET, the Centralized Estimation team, focus on is much more aligned with a career path in project management. To be able to kind of get all those things than it is from architects. And so we have found that by moving that to more of a project manager role that's staffing the CET, those folks are actually happier with the experience that they're gaining by doing this.
Is your standardized approach used on product implementation projects or mainly software development?
Well, we are the services organization, so everything that we're doing is project focused. We're not working, we do work with the product group, but that is kind of an internal thing, and it's not really, it's out of scope for what we do here. So it would be it's working with our customers on their projects. We actually use it for our own IP that we build, right? So as we harvest IP, we put it through our CT as well. What we call Microsoft eat our own dog food, if you will. So yeah, we use it ourselves for kind of our IP, but I don't want you to think that the Microsoft product group that's sitting in Seattle is doing that. That's a different organization. We don't use it for that.
Why can architects not learn to estimate? Is it only certification that makes them unhappy about estimation?
It's, so our experience is, it's not that they can't, I think. I don't know that I haven't seen an intrinsic desire to really do that part, or at least to do it kind of in the way where it drives consistency. Most of them will say that they can, right? But they will do it in a way where they say, I know how long it needs to build this widget. I've done it before. I've done it 10 times. It's 8 hours to build this. The challenge with that is it doesn't scale very well from a global organization. And that might be great if that architect is the one that's actually doing the work on the project. But that's not the way that we always work, right? Architects might be involved working with the customer to do the requirement elicitation, but it might not be that architect that's actually doing the implementation at the end of the day. And so it's not just architects, it's people, right? Really giving their point of view on what they think the size they're okay with, but the time and the effort, I think in the previous presentation it was like, tell me how big this pumpkin is. Well, everybody had kind of a different guess for what that is based upon their experience. It's the same thing here. And what we wanted to do is say, we don't want you, we know you have your experience for how long you think it takes, how much effort you think it is, but what we need to do is really pull it all together at an aggregate, right? And really use the aggregate history that we have from all of the work that we've done to figure out what that is.
Follow up with respect to the estimating approach.
Yeah.
Are you using more than one estimating approach? Multiple estimating methods are seen as a best practice, but it seems you have been able to successfully estimate with one approach.
Yeah, we do. We went through multiple different approaches, use case, like I said, WBS, and we're at EFUs right now. The good thing, Epics features and user stories, is we're very agile driven. Epics features and user stories allow us to be able to align to a very agile driven approach. It's what our product group uses for when we build the products that you know from Microsoft. They use a very epic feature user story approach as well. So it's been, by moving to the EFU approach and driving that taxonomy, it's actually helped us solve a lot of problems. So it's worked well for us. We've gone away from that. We weren't really good. WBS is, again, very bottoms up. It was people would equate time and effort for a lot of that, so those were the challenges there. Use case points, which was another iteration we had previously. It was, they had a couple challenges. One, not everybody were experts in UCP. The other challenge that we had with that is, at least the way that we saw UCP, the kinds of engagements that we do it's not always the full solution that we might be involved in just kind of creating a backend, right? Or we might be connecting and integrating to a backend that already exists. And at least the way that we had UCP instantiated, it was difficult to just say, hey, I'm just doing the user experience part, right? It would kind of assume that we were doing the whole solution, and so we ran into a lot of challenges with UCP because of that, and because folks were using transactions with UCP differently, not consistently. And so EFUs, when we moved to EFUs and really adopting what the product group uses and driving that, it's allowed us to get a lot more consistent. It's worked well for us.
Story point sizing is usually team specific.
Yeah.
Any guidance on how this can be standardized?
Yeah. So right now, at the beginning of the phase, right, where these architects are involved during the pursuit, they're not using story points, right? We do expect the teams, when it moves from pursuit to delivery, that's when they use story points. So during this phase, we have like 5 levels of t-shirt sizes, right? And we give guidance. So we're rolling out, right now, we're still globally rolling out education, right, on, all right, this is how we want to drive consistency from scoping. I mean, when it gets down to it, so if our PI we get from our history, if our quality we get from our history, the variability now is in the scoping, right? And so now what we're doing is if we can drive consistency from scoping, even if we're consistently wrong, we're getting consistent, and then we can change the math and tweak the math within SLIM to get more consistently right. And so but you're right, story points are very team-driven, and so we'll start, what we do in pre-sales is right now we're at t-shirt sizes. One of the common questions we get is, hey, we'd love what's the conversion of t-shirt size to story points? And we have kind of guidance that drives that, but it really does, we really want the team that's taking that to kind of, they start with what we have and then they make it their own. The end result of this, with the time and effort that comes from the t-shirt sizing for the user stories, it's a starting point for the delivery team to then break that down using the users. They'll break it down. They'll break the user stories down in their work items, and they'll equate the story points aligned with those user stories. But that's a little bit part of the journey, where we are within that journey right now. That's a great question.
Did or do you get pushback from the no estimates agile developer mindset? And any hints or statements to overcome such resistance?
I would say that there's a lot of differing points of view on Agile, and there are many folks out there that feel Agile means that one can have less discipline. We are very much the opposite of that, right? In fact, with an Agile-driven approach, we believe that it really requires much more discipline for one to do that. And so we hear there's a lot with Agile, and one of the kind of no need to estimate is, that's just one thing we hear with some of the confusion, or I should say differing opinions from an Agile perspective, and yeah, we respectfully disagree. Look, I mean, I think it's not an Agile thing. I think at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is get further down the cone of uncertainty, and that is methodology agnostic, right? And so we have a lot, this part of the phase is to try and get us further down the cone of uncertainty. We're not all the way down the cone of uncertainty, and so we actually have other things that complement this, like sprint zeros and stuff like that, where we still use the EFU methodology, and we'll estimate again at the end of the sprint zero after we have a better idea of the product backlog. But it is very rare where a customer just wants us to come in and not tell them how much time we think it will take or how much we think it will cost. We probably get more pushback on the other side, where they want to know the things before we even have a better idea of the scope.
Do you do lessons learned to compare estimates with final actuals to make improvements?
Yeah, no, so we're trying. I loved Angelo's response on the previous presentation, because we're in the same place. So we're at the point, we are trying to map our actuals back to our estimates. We keep our actuals, just like you said, any enterprise services organization keeps their actuals. Mapping that back to the estimates is really challenging, because so much changes between the time that we're kind of estimating, and it can change for all different reasons. And right now, we don't have a great way of really seeing the whole audit log, if you will, and being able to then map that back to the kind of the estimates. So we're working hard on trying to get our actuals and get them back in there. But by the time, when we're going and we're looking at, a project in whatever phase it's at right now, the actuals and the estimates could be pretty far off. And as Angela said, we're interviewing folks and saying, why are the actuals different than what we said it would be? And it could be that there was a legitimate change request, or there were other things that occurred, and there's a lot of different reasons why the actuals end up being different, which are very important for us to capture as well. So we're doing it, but it's taking longer than we'd love, but it's important, and we're doing it. It just takes a while, and it's a really challenging problem that we're trying to solve right now.
So we have a few more questions, but I just noticed that the time is 1:43, and I want you to be able to finish your slides.
Yeah.
Or we can continue, whichever you prefer.
Well, let me see what's on the next slide. So I can hit the main. I want to make sure I'm answering folks' questions. I think that's really the most important part of this. I think the rest of the slides really emphasize, just speak to more deeply what the process is that we've gone through. I've talked through a lot of this. I think the only thing, one of the learnings that we've had as we've gone through this that I haven't mentioned as well as what I'd say is we try to ship the SME review, the subject matter expert review, what we call shift left. So what used to happen is we'd go through the requirement elicitation, and then we'd go through the estimation, and then we'd get to kind of a review process. Do we think this is right? That kind of thing. And then we bring a subject matter expert in at the end. And as we went through this, we said, well, wait a second. If we shifted that left, if we introduced the subject matter expert earlier, working with the architect, not the time and the effort, but really on the size and the complexity, someone that really understands that space. So let's say it's bots or blockchain or something like that. And we had an architect in there that was working on it, but they weren't, they haven't had a ton of experience. We have someone that's really experienced that that's all they do is they're doing bots all the time, right? Then we would pull that person in to just look at the Epic features user stories and kind of compare that. Now that's resulted actually, and we have templates now, right, for something like bots. That'll be the starting point, but we still have that subject matter expert in before it goes to the CET to review the scope, right, the size of it, as well as the complexity and the size. Everything else I think we've kind of discussed, and just to, I guess, emphasize the point, and it was made in the earlier presentation, it's an iterative process. So, and the architect is still held responsible and accountable at the pursuit, so they're working with their estimation peer on the other side. They might get something back, and oftentimes we'll say, we get the estimate back, oh, by the way, someone didn't tell us there's a sizing, like there's a pricing constraint. The price to win is $2 million, and our current size was 3 or 4, right? Okay, let's put that back in. Or there's a duration, or there's some other constraints, or something goes on. So that conversation between the architect and the CT, it's a very peer. It's a buddy collaboration. It's an iterative process where they're working together. It's not throwing it over the wall and then getting it back. It is intended to be very, very collaborative and iterative. And I thought I heard that in the previous presentation as well. And really, we can go to questions because this last slide is really just, the point was to illustrate where we've gone before and where we are now. I think the only point I probably would emphasize is that something that's really important for us is really showing the benefit. From an architect perspective, it's been super valuable. I think we've gotten, the architects are happier, but it's really the business that's benefited. There's often this, do you want to do it quick or do you want to do it right? And really, we've been able to achieve both. We've gotten consistency, we've gotten quality, we've gotten defensibility. Our hope is to move more and more towards accuracy. We're working on that with the actuals. And we've also improved the velocity with how quick, how we're able to turn these things around. And it's had real significant business benefits that, the folks that aren't as close to this all the time see, and it's helping, drive kind of the desire to do more and more of this throughout other businesses as well. So with that, I'm happy to take whatever questions remain, Elizabeth.
Great. This is a reflection and a question.
Okay.
I'm an architect, an EA, solution architect too, and an estimator too.
Okay.
As was said earlier, the challenge is sizing. By this approach, the estimator role as an SME is becoming a commodity. They should rely on the features of the good tools provided by QSM, for example. Yep. What are your thoughts?
No, exactly. That's exactly what we do. So if I understood the question correctly, so we rely upon the architects. The architects don't use QSM. The estimators use QSM. And what we are guiding, or I hate to use the word mandate, but it's really that strongly that the architects aren't doing that. What we want the architects, though, to do is they're working with the customers, understanding the problem, creating the solution, both in terms of technical as well as decomposing the requirements down to the Epic features user stories, and understanding the size and the complexity of those user stories, right? And so that's their really main role, is to understand those aspects from it. That's really the part where they focus, and then that gets moved over to the folks, the estimators, that then take that scope and leverage SLIM to tell them what the time and effort are. There are other tweaks that are involved as well. We'll look at things like, hey, if a team's been involved there before, do we, the architect will capture those things in working with the customer. If it's a newer technology, other things that will include on top of EFUs to be able to help when working with the estimator to tweak the PI, given the bells and levers and whistle, all the stuff that the estimator knows, but the architect doesn't need to. They rely upon wholeheartedly. In fact, someone was asking me, I was giving a similar presentation internally the other day, and they said, well, are we going to just trust what comes out of SLIM? I said, let me rephrase that. We do trust what comes out of SLIM. It's not going to. We do trust it. Now, it's a conversation, right? They're iteratively working on it, but that is absolutely core to this.
What are the key inputs you use for t-shirt sizes and estimating in SLIM?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now we have guidance where it's like, we're traveling the world right now to make sure that we're consistent in the Americas, in EMEA, Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Asia Pacific, in India. So we're still, as part of this whirlwind tour, I'll be in Europe in 2 weeks, and that this is part of it to kind of reskill the newer, the folks that haven't gone there to kind of get through that. And a big part of this, we've developed, when we split this apart, we said, great, the architects have their, we're much more focused on what their role and responsibility is and its scope. Now, how do we drive consistency with scope, right? How do we drive consistency with sizing? And so we developed a course, actually. I mean, it's essentially a one-day course that we go through that we require all of the architects to take that say, we're kind of in a journey. We actually worked with QSM on this, right, to say, how do we get there, right? Are there examples that you can say to say, how big is this pumpkin, right? And so that everybody comes to the fact that the pumpkin seems like it's about 1,700 pounds, right? We're not there yet, but that's what we're trying to get to. So where we've started is, and it's a little debatable, is, all right, if you think it's a week, if you think it's more, now there are pros and cons to that, and we realize that, right? The pro and con is we're using a time-based way to guide it to tell them not to use time to get to, we want SLIM to use time. It's a stepping stone, right? So we're kind of at the point right now where we're using a rule of thumb based on time just to get folks to get consistent, for us to get to examples where we could start to peel back and wean away from time-based guidance to something that says if it looks like this, then that's small. If it looks like this, then it's large. So we're still, we're at different parts of the journey in different aspects, but that's where we are with that one.
How much effort is involved for a pursuit estimate? How many iterations are typically done?
I'll give the consulting answer of it depends, right? I mean, it depends a lot on a lot of different things, though, right? If it's an incubation space that is one that is kind of new to us, it might take more iterations to do than if it's more of a commodity for us, right? If it's pure, hey, we're moving, applications from on-premises to the cloud, and there's nothing really rocket science-y about it, that's pretty easy. In fact, we've almost got that down to a science, right? If it's, we've done a lot of bot work, and the bot stuff's kind of getting down to a science now. If it gets into, if we had quantum deals, coming in, tomorrow, those would require a lot more iterations because there's a lot more new stuff to it. The size of the deal is probably another pivot where it requires more. A larger deal usually requires, more iterations than a smaller deal, aside from the incubation space that I talked about. Geography is probably the third pivot where there's some variability, in the number of iterations, and that's just based upon the maturity that those architects have kind of gone through. As we roll this out globally, some architects have been doing it longer and, have embraced it quicker than others, and so, and we see that basically vary by geography. Actually, believe it or not, Asia Pacific is probably the best at embracing this and really driving that, and their ability to kind of embrace it and quickly adapt to the change has allowed them to become really, the KPIs that we measure around this for Asia are through the roof.
Do the engagement partners buy into the estimates?
I think not everybody. Well, not everybody's read the book, right? The 5 core principles, and so there's that same adoption and change management that we see internally, I would say we see with partners and customers as we talk to this. It takes a little bit of evidence to show that. I'll give you an example. We have, Microsoft's a huge organization, and we have different teams that work on different things. And so we're working with, call it an engagement partner that's focused on a specific industry, and we were working with them to create an EFU template so that we can, because a lot of it is dev, and so we were the primary folks that got engaged for this specific industry. And I saw the same adoption change management. Well, we resist it. We've done it this way. It's worked well for us. Well, it hasn't really worked well because we have evidence that show it's been underestimated almost all the time. So we just kind of made this commitment to them. We said, look, let's get an actuals. And we did that. We got the actuals. We said, and let's run it through our tools. We'll run both of them through. And my commitment to you is if your method comes out closer to the actuals, not the estimate, but the actuals that we saw, then we'll keep working on ours. But if ours is closer, then we should use the new approach, and ours ended up being closer to the actuals that we saw. It takes people. I haven't seen engagement partners just willingly just say, "Yep, okay, that's great," unless they know Slim and they've adopted. We have seen that. They say, "Oh, you're using Slim, okay, that's great, we get it." But if they haven't and it's new to them, it requires a little bit of evidence for them to get over that hump.
For actuals, is the sizing collected in EFUs only?
That's what we're driving to. We haven't gotten it. So that's where we've gone. Now that we've gone to the EFUs, our delivery organization is a single taxonomy. But that's been part of our journey. So the historic projects that we had weren't in EFUs. Everything now that we're doing, and that we've done from a delivery perspective probably for the last year to 18 months from a delivery perspective has been an EFU. So we're able to start to capture that now. There's some exceptions, but as a general rule, it is now.
And this might be a good one to end with, actually, because I think we're getting close to the end of our time. And just in case I missed somebody, there was like a melee of questions, which was fantastic. And I just want to make sure if there was anybody I missed, I will go through and make sure that they were all answered, and I will defer them over to Lenny if there's something that I missed in here.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, actually, yeah, I have one last one. How do you address risk relative to cost and schedule?
Yeah. So the answer is the same as the one Angelo gave, right? The risk, so we have risk reserve and costs and all those things that are done outside of the tool, and there's business rules and things like that. Risk reserve varies depending upon geography, depending upon, there's a lot of other factors than EFU and scope and like that are outside of the magic algorithm that is at the core for SLIM that impact cost and risk reserve. And so that's kind of out of scope for what we do here. It does come into play as part of the overall pursuit process, but it's not within what we're doing here.
Well, this has been a great discussion, and I really appreciate, Lenny, you being able to answer all of these questions, and it was a wonderful presentation.